Sharing with you in this video how to act without resistance when creating your dreams and goals. And the first thing that I want to share with you in this video in terms of how to actually do this is to understand that resistance is just identification with thought and emotion. That's where all resistance comes from when it comes to you taking action. Any possible resistance that again comes from taking an action is just a result of you personalizing your actions just a little bit too much. You've become your actions. Now it's true on one level of life, we are a product of our actions. We are a result of just the actions that we take. But on another level though, there's a certain level of resistance that comes forth to be when you attach to your thoughts and your emotions. When you attach to your mind and your emotions, there's again no flow in the way that you take action. There's that natural and inevitable resistance. And the reason this is the case is because again, you're personalizing everything that you're doing just a little bit too much. And I'm not saying that this is you, but oftentimes any single person can get stuck in this pattern of seeing that ultimately speaking, if you don't get involved in the action too much, when I say involved, I mean in an unconscious way. Of course, you want to be fully involved and fully conscious in everything that you do. But what I mean is involved in a way where you're not really involving the essence in terms of how you're doing what you're doing anymore. It's just robotic, do the action, do the thing, get the result, and that's it. And I think that life is a little bit deeper than that. I think that there's something more in depth that we should all be focused on that's going to allow us to actually, again, act without resistance. And acting without resistance happens naturally when you disidentify from thought and emotion. When you stop becoming your actions, when you stop creating your identity to be a result of only the actions that you take, when you have a greater sense of identity, what begins to happen is that every single action that you take becomes again infused with this sort of spiritual awareness where there's just less resistance while you do stuff. It's just that simple. And what I find is that this is the difference between actually loving what you're doing every single day and actually being able to maintain it in the long run instead of just this short-term burst of motivation that never lasts or doesn't have any consistency. You become sort of this consistent action taker and it's easier to do it. It's not hard to do it. So to be able to maintain something on an extremely long-term basis, I believe that it's a requirement for you to love what you do. If you don't love what you do, if there's no essence, if there's no love behind how you're doing what you're doing, eventually, in my personal opinion, it is going to fall apart. Now, the second thing that I want to share with you in this video in terms of how to act without resistance when creating your dreams and goals is to have what I believe to be called higher self action. Every single action that you take should not be coming from your lower self, it should be coming from your higher self. Now, both of these are just words, but ultimately these words that I'm sharing with you, I'm attempting to point to something a little bit deeper than just something at the surface level. What I'm pointing to is, again, the place that you're taking action from and how you are doing things. I think that when we can take action from a lower state and from our lower self, everything feels like a fight. Everything feels like a grind, so to speak. And there's nothing wrong with putting in the work or putting in the grind or whatever the case might be. But again, it has to be exciting. Like there has to be a level of excitement where, again, you do love what you do. And it's not that there's not going to be bad days. It's not that there's not going to be times where maybe you're a little bit too stressed out or that things go wrong. It's not that none of this is going to happen. In fact, it will. But the difference is that if you're actually excited about it, you love all of that too. You also love that whole process of maybe things going wrong and then the inevitable part of it, and then maybe you're overthink sometimes and this and that. It's like, no, you love it. But the key is to return over and over and over to higher self-action rather than lower self-action so that then we can act without resistance. Resistance is just, in my personal opinion, taking action from your lower self. And lower self is going back to what we talked about earlier in the video. It's almost a synonymous term for identification with thought and emotion. That's like what the lower self is. If you want to see somebody that consistently blames the outside world, can't take any sort of accountability in their life, they can't self-reflect, they're always pointing fingers, always judging, always being negative, bad attitude, never able to be a solution-oriented thinker, always overthinking, never able to, be calm, and all these types of things. All of this sort of chaos is just a result of attachment to your thoughts and emotions, in my personal opinion. Because one negative situation happens, and then we personalize it. And we think, this is me now. I am this person that has this negativity and this negative energy and this negative problem and these thought patterns that always happen to me. It's like, but is it possible that we're kind of choosing to do that? Now, I'm not saying that you can control every single thought, but when it comes to repeating the same mistakes over and over, that's a problem. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with doing the same thing over and over, assuming that you have a different essence behind how you do it every single time you do it. But repeating the same mistakes over and over, that's a problem. So every single moment, if you want to, again, act without resistance, try to ask yourself, are you taking action right now from your lower self, or are you taking action from your higher self? And again, these might just be words. It's like, oh, this is just, you might think it's just a little bit too new agey for me. And it's like, it's just a word game. He's just talking about a word game right now. But again, what I'm inviting you to actually look at, which is possibly something a little bit deeper, is what is the truth prior to all of these words: higher self, lower self, ego, this and then that. It's just like, the truth is beingness prior to anything that's happening. And then so I think that from that space, what begins to happen is that we naturally just know how to act with as little resistance as possible. It's not to say that you're going to fight your negative emotions. It's not to say that you're going to dishonor challenges or dishonor, again, negative situations or whatever the case might be. But at the end of the day, though, there's a non-resistance to it, because there's an acceptance to what's happening, seeing that it is the case. It's quite literally nonsensical to say that something that is happening shouldn't be happening, because it is. So if something is happening, to say that it shouldn't be happening is the mental part of it. And the key is not to resist the mental part of it. Maybe if you're noticing your mind do this, but just simply to have awareness of it. Because when we can simply have awareness and notice that our mind is possibly doing things that are not in alignment with who we want to be and what it is that we want to create at the highest level, naturally you begin to let it go, because you see that it is just not working. When you truly see that something is not working from a space of awareness, rather than just attachment and caring about the result only, or whatever the case might be, it becomes easier to transform, it becomes easier to change. So again, ask yourself, are you coming from your lower self in that moment, if you maybe feel like you're taking action with too much resistance, or are you coming from your highest self? What would your highest self do in that moment? And would there be so much resistance if there wasn't so much attachment to your thoughts and your emotions and your ego, so to speak? Which again, people have different definitions of what the ego is. You can look at the ego as just, your thoughts and your emotions and your past history and who you think you are. But another way to look at it is just that, the identification with thought and form aspect. However you want to look at it, the key issue is the attachment. If you have an ego, let's just say that your ego is not necessarily, connected to attachment at all. It's just a structure of who you are. Now, when you attach to the structure of who you are, that's where you're now acting from your lower self. And so the final thing that I want to share with you in this video, in terms of how to act without resistance when creating your dreams and goals, is to have consistency. Do the same thing over and over. And it's not to, again, make the same mistake over and over. It's about doing the same thing over and over, because when you're able to do the same thing over and over and over, eventually you have momentum. Momentum makes it so that it's much easier for you to actually do whatever it is that you want to do, because now it becomes sort of like autopilot. No more thinking required. When something becomes a part of your identity, you naturally do it without thinking about it. It becomes a part of your subconscious. If it becomes a part of your subconscious, you don't have to think about it anymore. It's because you've done it so consistently over such a long period of time, and you've done it at such high volume again and again and again and again, it's just now it's a part of who you are. It's easy. Now, the only thing that would feel uncomfortable is if you level it up just a little bit more and maybe add more load to it, make it harder, do something more difficult. That's what would add more resistance to it if you wanted to have resistance. But at the end of the day though, without being too logical and too analytical here, understand that if you want to act without resistance, do something again and again and again and again, and then eventually, maybe if it starts off difficult, the claim that I'm making is that it will become easy. It will become easy over time, even if it's boring sometimes, even if there's a lot of resistance at the beginning. You have to sort of move through that first phase where it becomes easier after the initial phase of resistance. Because again, resistance, like for example, if you remember your first time riding a bike, possibly there was a lot of resistance there and it felt very weird and uncomfortable to ride a bike, and it's like, oh, this feels a little bit strange and I've never done this before, kind of thing, right? But then eventually you learn, and it doesn't take that much time really. Like, it takes a little bit of time. Maybe at the beginning it feels again like it's not going to work, but then before you know it, there's momentum, and now you have speed, and it's easier. And the more speed that you get, actually the easier that it is. Same thing with flying a plane. Like, when you finally get to a certain level of speed, it becomes just very easy to maintain that level of speed on some level. All you have to do is just be there and maintain it. You don't necessarily have to do anything drastically different. You just sort of maintain where you are. And what happens as a result is it becomes a lot easier. It just becomes very, very easy. It doesn't become this hard thing that requires a lot of thinking and a lot of focus, and you need to be very, very diligent. It's just natural. You can be very focused, you can be very aware, you can be connected to the present moment, but at the end of the day though, it's just going to feel a part of who you are. It's just conscious autopilot. You're present to the moment, you're there, you're conscious, but yet all of these actions that you need to be taking are just happening on autopilot without even you needing to think about it at all. It's just a very natural part of who you are. And again, that is when you absolutely will take actions without any resistance at all. It'll be smooth, it'll be almost effortless, there will be no resistance, because it's just who you are. It's not something you're trying to get to. Like, that's a big problem that I think people have as well when they're setting on a goal or letting go of possibly some bad habit, is they're trying to let go of the habit. You know, they're on the journey to let it go, on the journey to stop doing it. And it's like, well, think about the core identity of that. The core identity of that is that you're still a person that has the issue. You still have a problem that you're trying to let go of. If you can imagine the end result as if it's already been happened in this present, it already has happened in this present moment right now. Like, imagine that situation as if it has already happened in this present moment right now. What begins to happen is that all you would really imagine is, again, the place that you would be at. And there's no resistance there. And all the resistance comes from just the possibility that you can even get into that sort of realm of thinking at all. And again, even if negative situations happen, even if problems happen, oftentimes the biggest challenge is how we react to them, not the actual situation itself. It's oftentimes not the situation. The situation oftentimes has very little to do with our suffering. I would say that maybe only 5 to 10% of it at all. Only 5 to 10% of suffering, I think, comes from the actual situation. A majority of it is the mental aspect of it that we actually sort of slap on top of all that meaning on top of the situation. So again, if you want to make it easier for yourself and you want things to be easy and effortless and smooth, do the same thing over and over, even if it feels like you're doing it at the beginning and it feels like there's resistance. Just do it again and again and again, and eventually what you'll find is that it just becomes much easier over time, naturally.